Hello, my name is Theresa Stack. I'm an associate professor at Montana Tech, and I will be covering for you today the basics of ergonomics. And this learning unit follows chapter 2 in our text, Occupational Ergonomics, a Practical Approach. So as you take a look at the video of the checkout clerks, this is a task we're all familiar with. Where do you think these workers will hurt at the end of the day? Where might they feel pain or discomfort? And can you relate that back to their physical reactions with the work environment? Is their exposure to the physical workplace risk factors? If you're unsure of the answer, you should be real sure by the end of this learning unit, because that's part of what we're going to discuss here together. So the objectives for this learning unit, you will be able to comprehend the terms common to the practice of occupational ergonomics, understand how occupational ergonomics improves work environments by matching tasks, tools, and processes to people's capabilities and limitations. And by the end of the learning unit, you'll be able to identify and remember the physical workplace risk factors, the contributing workplace risk factors, and start to gain an understanding of how you can use the analysis of these to improve the work environments for folks so they're less likely to be injured or less likely to experience pain at the end of the day. So ergonomics of everyday things, we already practice ergonomics. Sometimes we just don't realize we're doing so. So in our example here, this is for people who are shoveling. You put your hands in a more neutral position, which eliminates the strain on the forearms and somewhat the lower back when shoveling. Then we have our homemade dual toothbrush chain cleaning tool. So instead of doing one side and the other, you can use both sides at the same time, reducing the duration that somebody's exposed to the physical workplace risk factors. We also have here, when you have those large containers of soap, and you're able to store that above your top loading washer, which a lot of us don't have anymore, although we do load our soap from the top, then you don't have to pick up the bucket as often or the container of dish soap, and this would reduce, again, duration and force. And the final example of how we use ergonomics in our everyday lives or our everyday things is the picture of these forearm movers where it improves your posture because you don't have to bend down to be able to pick up the part anymore. You can do it in a more neutral position. So some more ergonomics of everyday things. This is a pretty neat example. And there was a graduate student who had a grandmother and a grandfather with similar last names. One was Henry and one was Henrietta. And by accident, the grandfather took the grandmother's prescription, diabetes prescription. And so the names looked similar. Of course, the name of the prescription was exactly the same, but the milligrams was different. And it was kind of a close brush with death there and the grandfather. And so the student realized there was this mismatch between the product and the user. And to try to counterbalance this mismatch so people don't make errors anymore, she redesigned the prescription bottle. So now you can see the name is also on the top. Well, you can't see that, but the name of the prescription is on the top here, as well as the name of the patron. Because the bottle is flat and there's a bigger surface area, we could blow up the font and make it bigger so it's easier to see. Also, kind of the really neat thing that she did besides making the font bigger, able to read from a standing position, which usually you're doing, you're above your prescriptions, is that you can see the precautions are listed on the back instead of where they put the different stickers on the medicine bottle, and sometimes it covers up some part of that prescription that you may need to read, like the name or the dosage. But also that you can put these different color rings on. So this one's orange. It could be orange for the grandpa, and then green for the grandma, and blue for the children, and then you're less likely to make the mistake. So this is another example of where products are fit to the capabilities or the limitations of people. So if we understand something about people, we can really make a change to the workplace or other things that we take a look at in our lives. So a definition of ergonomics, there's plenty of them, but one of them is ergonomics removes barriers to quality, productivity, and human performance by fitting tasks, products, and environments to people. So ergonomics of everyday places. What design features within a tavern can be considered ergonomic? What would make somebody stay there longer, be more comfortable? Possibly a rounded edge, a soft edge on the edge of a bar, a footrest to prop your feet up when you're standing or sitting to reduce some of the pressure on your lower back would help you stand for longer pieces of time. Sometimes we believe that tavern owners were the first ergonomists. Ergonomics. Ergonomics is essentially fitting the workplace to the worker, and the better this fit, the higher the level of worker safety and worker efficiency. Ergonomics is derived from two Greek words, ergon meaning work, and nomos meaning the principles or laws. Ergonomics was first coined by a Polish philosopher who was trying to base on the truths drawn from the science of nature. That's the book that he wrote. And he saw the mismatch between the worker and their job and how over time certain types of diseases and disorders developed. You can also see this term ergonomics being called out in the work by Riccardo Bramazzini, considered the father of occupational medicine, and he used a systematic approach of applying his knowledge about what workers were exposed to and the types of diseases that they had incurred. And so I'm reading right from the text here, the second cause I ascribe to certain violent and irregular motions and unnatural postures of the body, by reason of which the natural structure of the vital machine is so impaired that serious disease gradually develops. And that was written in the 1700s. So ergonomics has been around for a long time. It started with, in the 1900s, Franklin Taylor and his scientific management. And this is an example where you see the shovels. He saw that different size shovels, you can optimize how much weight somebody can pick up and move. So for example, something that's light like coal, you can have a bigger shovel to shovel from, whereas something that's really heavy like gravel, you would have to have a smaller shovel to be within the capabilities of the people. And they were able to look at the size of the shovel and increase or decrease the amount of time somebody was able to work, and also to make them most efficiency. And then we, kind of fast forward here, Henry Ford was also, although looking at the bottom line in lean engineering, he tried to increase his economy by he said that no man should ever have to stoop to attach a wheel or bolt or anything else to the moving chassis, because he realized that this increased the duration of people's exposure and made them less likely to be able to do the job over a long period of time, and ultimately left them less efficient. Now, there's another side of ergonomics called human factors, and that's more of our cognitive ability, how we integrate with electronics or the world around us, how things are or are not matched to our mental model. Some place where you can see that is this is the control panel of 3 Mile Island. And if you know the story, there was definitely a mismatch between the way the gauges moved and the way the alarms went off, which caused people to helped to cause people to make some mistakes. We see this as machine-induced errors instead of human-induced errors, right? So we went from shoveling to time and motion studies, Henry Ford, also cockpits, designs, and displays in the early 1900s when they were increasing the use of aircraft. We moved into computer hardware and software issues, and now, of course, adaptive technology, from shovels to aircraft to more advanced technology.
Exoskeleton suits aim to revolutionize many aspects of our lives. Workers on a shipyard in Appraoch, South Korea have superhuman strength thanks to a new robotic suit. Daewoo Shipbuilding and Marine Engineering, the company that makes some of the biggest ships in the world, was testing the robotic suits last year. They can reportedly fit people between 63 and 73 inches tall and allow the person wearing it to easily lift a 70-pound piece of metal. The suit frame itself is made of aluminum alloy, carbon, and steel, all powered by hydraulic joints. It weighs 60 pounds, but it doesn't feel heavy because the suit supports its own weight and moves along with the person wearing it. People strap into the suit starting with their feet, moving up their body where hydraulic joints and electric motors are connected to a backpack that powers and controls the system. Eventually, the developers want people wearing the suit to be able to lift 200 pounds, which will increase productivity by allowing workers to easily lift large, heavy pieces of metal.
So it seems like the way of the future to take a look at this, but as you can see here, even this adaptive technology can be used with people using sanders and grinders. It doesn't have to be the entire body like this person is strapped into. It can just be something that allows them to manipulate their hand and take some of the forces away, or for them to use their hands in awkward postures, like with their hands above their head, and remove some of the forces. So at Puget Sound Shipyard, we were doing some work there looking at these exoskeletons. So that's kind of the way of the future. So ergonomics is fitting the workplace to the worker to prevent injury, increase efficiency and comfort. And what we're trying to prevent is the development of musculoskeletal disorders. Musculoskeletal disorders occur slowly over time due to repeated microtrauma to the body's soft tissues. That's your muscles, tendons, ligaments, cartilage, spinal discs, where two bones come together. That's your joints or your nervous system. Typically, musculoskeletal disorders that are work related do not occur acutely. They occur chronically due to microtraumas to the body, slowly over time. And a work related musculoskeletal disorder is a musculoskeletal disorder that is caused or aggravated by your work methods. So we use that term here in the United States, work related musculoskeletal disorders, because that's the term that OSHA uses, although you may hear different terms used in other countries, such as overuse syndrome or repetitive motion syndrome, and they may be work related musculoskeletal disorders by a different name. So, can you think about what some of these modern day occupational disorders could be? Carpenter's elbow, that's cubital tunnel syndrome. So, that is an irritation of the ligament or the tendon that runs over the elbow from people who are, for example, using a hammer and using their hand over and over again. So, this would be carpenter's elbow. Bricklayer's knee is now patella bursitis. So this is kind of the historic term versus the actual work-related musculoskeletal disorder. And that's inflammation of the bursa on the patella or under the knee. De Quervain's disease. Boy, this kind of dates the presentation, right? We can't even call it BlackBerry thumb anymore. Now we can call it texting thumb or gamer's thumb. Same idea, overuse of the thumb, somehow causing inflammation. Again, this is actually a tendon disorder, inflammation of the tendon or the sheath of the tendon in the thumb from overuse. Because believe it or not, our thumbs weren't designed for that range of motion. They were designed for power, not for precision. And cervical disc damage, now that's caused tech neck or iPad neck from holding our head down in long periods of time. So these are just some examples of modern day occupational disorders. Ergonomics seeks to prevent these work-related musculoskeletal disorders by evaluating and taking control of our physical workplace risk factors. Our physical workplace risk factors are posture, compression, force, repetition, vibration, and then because it's the dose that makes the poison, the last physical workplace risk factor is duration. It modifies or exasperates the other physical workplace risk factors. Typically, most of the time when we're talking about an ergonomic principle that's been violated, it's a combination of these physical workplace risk factors that leads to the development of a work-related musculoskeletal disorder. So it is not acute, it's chronic in nature, and it's the combination of the physical workplace risk factors. And here in the picture, you can see awkward posture of the torso and the neck, as well as potentially compression from having something hard in contact with the worker's elbow, and then leaning there for a long period of time would be the exposure to duration. So on the other side of our physical workplace risk factors, there are risk factors that contribute to but do not cause work-related musculoskeletal disorders. Some of them are personal in nature and others are related to the work environment. So for example, temperature extremes, either way, hot or cold, work pace or stress in the workplace can contribute to the development of a WMSD. Age and gender, the older we get, the more likely it is that we've been previously injured, or maybe we lose some flexibility. It takes the body, for most people, generally speaking, a longer time to heal. Women are 5 to 11 times more likely to develop a work-related musculoskeletal disorder of the upper extremities than their male counterparts. Our hobbies, maybe we are a gamer. So I'm not, but I know somebody in this department here who is, and that person spends a lot of time on the computer at work and then goes home and games and spends a lot of time doing similar motions. And so the hobbies can contribute to the work-related musculoskeletal disorder development if that person had one. Certain medical conditions that reduce your circulation, like thyroid disease and diabetes, can lead to the development of a work-related musculoskeletal disorder, as well as smoking, because your body heals much slower and you don't have as much oxygen in your muscles, which you need for muscle recovery. And then fatigue can also lead to or contribute to the development of a work-related musculoskeletal disorder. So what are our physical workplace risk factors for this guy? He is getting inside an H-63 helicopter, one of the largest helicopters that the Navy flies. He's doing some work inside of that cell, and you can see him climbing into his access door. When he's in there for a pretty good duration, 2 to 3 hours at a time. So what are the physical workplace risk factors? Or where would this person hurt at the end of the day? So before we start to talk about our physical workplace risk factors, let's define our neutral position. Our neutral position is the optimal position of the body to reduce the risk of work-related musculoskeletal disorders. Because in the neutral position, we're the strongest, we're the fastest, we have the longest endurance. We're not in extension or flexion, we're halfway between, so we're at our resting point, and we reduce the amount of muscle force required to do the job. So the neutral posture also promotes blood flow, nerve conduction, and we are the strongest. So your neutral posture, you can see that by looking at the body's landmarks. So as you're sitting there listening to the video, maybe watching something else, maybe standing up, walking around the kitchen, are your ears over your shoulders over your hips over your knees, your elbows in close to the side of your body so that your elbows are about in line with your hip, so your arms aren't winged out like chicken arms, and your arms bent in about a 90-100 degree angle. This is your neutral posture. What's really cool about thinking about it this way is that if somebody was bending forward to text on their phone and their ears were no longer over their shoulders, you can easily see that whether you were in your regular street clothes, level D, personal protective equipment, or even level A, personal protective equipment. So look for the neutral posture. Ergonomists love the neutral posture because of all the physical workplace risk factors. Posture is the easiest one to change because it's somewhat behavioral based, although it could be based on the task itself. So what's the big deal about our neutral posture and awkward postures? So I'm showing you a grip meter here. This will measure my grip strength. And you can see how the meter is going to move. So I'm in my neutral posture and I'm squeezing with as much force as I possibly can. And I brought that meter up to about 70 pounds of force in my neutral position. Now I'm going to bring the dial all the way back down again. I'm going to put myself in an awkward posture. So an awkward posture would be this flexion. So I'm squeezing again with as much force as I can. And you can see that I went from 70 pounds down to 20 pounds by putting myself in flexion. Quite a big change there from neutral posture to flexion. Now I'm going to put myself in extension. And I'm squeezing with as much force as I can. And I went from 70 pounds down to about 25 pounds. So this is the same in all of your body positions. When you're in your neutral posture, you're the strongest. As you start to deviate, you become weaker. So the strongest is neutral, then flexion, then extension, then ulnar deviation, and lastly radial deviation for the hand. But whether you're leaning backwards, which would be extension, or curling forward, which would be flexion of the torso, you have decreased strength. So for the hand, it's because you can't recruit all those muscles in the forearm. And it's the same thing with the rest of the body. You can't recruit the muscles. When you're squeezing your forces, your muscles are already stretched out. Your tendon can be going around a corner with a bony protrusion in it. And all these things cause you to not be able to perform the task as strongly or with the likelihood of not being injured as it would be if you were in a neutral position. So ergonomists love the neutral posture. Ears over the shoulders, shoulders over the hips, hips over the knees, elbows tucked in tight, about 90 degree, 110 degree angle. Awkward posture is any posture outside of neutral. The more deviated that posture, the higher the amount of stress and strain on the human body for a number of reasons. Awkward or unsupported postures can stretch workers to their physical limits, their physical ability to actually perform the job. So here's an example of how you can raise the work surface up to the worker, and that's a solution as far as ergo goes. Can you change the height of the work surface? Can you change the height of the work piece or the things that people are working on? Or can you change the height of the worker? So some other examples of neutral or awkward postures and neutral postures is that you can see the awkward posture with smoothing out the concrete, and they would be able to have a more neutral posture if they had a float on the end of the tool there that allowed it to change its orientation or the way in which it comes into contact with the concrete to make it easier for the workers. So a lot of times in ergonomics, what you're trying to do is dial down one of those physical workplace risk factors as opposed to completely getting rid of one. So we can kind of limit their dose of an awkward posture, make it less awkward, which will also reduce the amount of force required to do the job if the job has some force associated with it. As you saw, the more awkward the posture, the less amount of force that you can safely apply. So if you still had to apply that force, you'd be straining the muscles a lot more. Or can you change the duration, the repetition, or the compression? So we're just going to talk really briefly here about the neutral posture for computer use. And really, generally speaking, the 90-90-90 doesn't really work like you see. Your hips should be up slightly higher than your knees, 90 to 125 degree angle between your torso and your knees so that you can open up that space and not close it down, and that eliminates or reduces some of the pressure on the lower back when your hips are higher than your knees. Same thing goes with the elbows at 90 degrees. They should be a little bit more open so blood will flow and nerves will conduct. If you're interested in office ergonomics, just go ahead and find that video, or of course part of the Ergo class for Montana Tech. You can click ahead and be able to find that and watch office ergonomics. This is just kind of your overview.
You probably don't consider yourself a sedentary person. You probably think that the whole sitting disease epidemic doesn't apply to you. Well, let's take a moment to think about how we actually spend our days. We start each morning sitting down with a cup of joe. We sit in our cars to drive to work, where from 9 to 5 we're slumped behind our desks plugging away at spreadsheets and reports. Sitting in our cars, we drive home, where we take a seat to eat dinner. Finally, we park ourselves on the couch and call it a day. On average, we spend 3 hours a day being active. Unfortunately, these active hours cannot counteract the physical effects of all the sitting we do. Spending 87.5% of our time being sedentary is just not conducive to a healthy lifestyle. We have been taught to sit since we were toddlers, eating Cheerios in our high chairs. We then went off to school, where the first lesson was Sitting Quietly 101. As working adults, we go off to work every day, where we spend hours on end slouched in our cubicle. We have a love affair with the chair. In fact, the chair is the most designed and celebrated artifact of the modern era. But sadly, in this case, love hurts. Most likely you spend your workdays a lot like this guy, feeling tired and unproductive in your sophisticated ergonomic chair. Let's take a second to go over exactly what happens when you take a seat. Immediately, electrical activity in the leg muscles shuts off. Your fat-eating enzymes drop by 90%, allowing fat cells to park themselves exactly where you don't want them. Your calorie burn rate drops to less than 1 calorie per minute. As we sit for longer periods, the consequences become more serious to vital organs like the lungs and heart. Oxygen intake to the lungs decreases and blood flow to the heart slows. Prolonged sitting has even been identified as an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease. Our brain is affected by prolonged sitting too. Blood flow to the brain slows and brain fog sets in, leaving us drowsy and unfocused. Sitting for extended periods compresses the spinal discs unevenly. Collagen hardens around tendons and ligaments, causing back stiffness and pain. All of that slouching you do is more than just a pain in the neck. It can result in cervical strain, overextension of the shoulder and back muscles, and shortening of the pecs. When seated, the hip flexors shorten and tighten too, limiting your range of motion. Sitting requires your abdominal muscles to do absolutely nothing, resulting in unengaged, soft abs. Ready to stand up yet? Conventional ergonomic wisdom dictates that desk-bound workers should maintain a seated posture in which the hips are positioned in a 90-degree angle. These guidelines, first developed by the U.S. military, continue to inform chair design. But it's time to break free. Let us instead take a cue from astronauts floating in outer space. In microgravity environments, our bodies assume their most neutral, unstressed position. With major muscle groups engaged and in balance, our hips open at a 135-degree angle, forming the foundation for a healthy spinal posture. Martin Keene, founder of Focal Upright, gets this. His designs keep the body active and engaged, minimizing the risk of sitting disease and bringing energy to the workday. So what are you waiting for? Join the upright revolution.
So I'm not also sure about the pogo stick chair, but there are some chairs that help you to keep your hips above your knees, some saddle seats that allow you to get your pelvis in the right position and reduce some of that stress and strain on the body. So static postures are postures for which you hold for long periods of time, more than a minute or two at a time. One of the problems with static postures is that it restricts blood flow, which causes a deoxygenation of the muscles, a change in the pH in that area, and can give insufficient recovery time when you're in a static posture. Static postures can be just as fatiguing as awkward positions, and you can kind of see the combination here between posture and holding it for a long period of time, a static posture. So when you're leaning forward, you have your head is contributing 42 pounds of weight because force is weight times distance to the loading in the trapezius muscles, as opposed to being in an awkward posture. And there it's more of a 1-to-1 ratio. The head is only contributing about 12 pounds, or about the weight of itself. So we have our awkward postures and we have our static postures. The next ergonomic risk factor is repetition. Repetition is performing the same task over and over again, and so your body again doesn't have a chance to heal. Also, your tendons, which connect muscle to bone, are sliding inside of a tendon sheath, and that can cause inadequate recovery time for the synovial fluid to lubricate that joint, lubricate that tendon. It does lubricate the joint too, but I wasn't talking about the joint, I was talking about the tendon. And also, when you have repetition, your tendon is sliding back and forth inside of the tendon sheath, and that can cause friction, which builds up heat and causes inflammation inside the tendon, which can lead to more wear and tear. So here's an example of repetitively squeezing a caulking gun, or using an automated caulking gun, so you don't have that highly repetitive motion. Force is our next physical workplace risk factor. Forceful exertions due to the weight of the object, friction, or posture can cause stress on the soft tissues and lead them to fatigue pretty quickly. So the power zone, where you are the strongest when you're lifting, when you're picking something up, is keeping objects above the knees or below the shoulders. This is considered your power zone. That's because you're trying to keep yourself in that neutral position, and the further the hands are held away from the body, it's just the body is like a lever arm system. You'll learn a little bit more about this in biomechanics, but the further your hands are away from the body, the higher the force is on the lower back. So when we take our hands and we dip them down below our knees, we have to pick up the weight of our torso, and we're in an awkward position. Your neck is not, your ears aren't over your hips anymore. And then when you pick up an object and you're going above your shoulders, you tend to lean back, and so you're in extension. And extension is weaker than when you're in a neutral posture, because you're using your extenders, more of your stabilizer muscles. Compression is our next physical workplace risk factor. Compression is when you have a hard object that's pressing against your soft tissue. We see this primarily in our upper extremities, where you're resting on a hard surface, such as resting your elbow on a desk edge, or here you have the worker who's resting their arm on the edge of a box that's used to keep all the stuff together that he's assembling. The issue with compression in the upper extremities, so if you grabbed onto your hand or your forearm and you squeezed it, and then you moved your fingers like you were playing the piano, you can feel your tendons moving back and forth. And so your tendons, your tendon sheaths, your ligaments, they're close to the surface of your skin in your upper extremities. So it's really easy to compress into those, which would cause direct compression or direct force, as well as increase the friction if you're moving them back and forth because of the compression. It might prevent synovial fluid from getting back into the tendon or getting back into the joint, and all these things can cause damage. It could be from grasping sharp objects like a sharp tool, something that doesn't have coating on it, like a angular spoon, people that are in the kitchen, or it could be from resting on a hard or a sharp desk edge. So an example that we have here is you can see the awkward posture and the compression. This worker is doing very precise work, so they want to stabilize their hands so they don't shake, and they're resting their wrists right where the transverse ligament is, right in the carpal tunnel area, on something that's sharp, and applying force by using the small tool. The solution that we're able to put in place is to pad the edge that not only helped to straighten out the wrist, but provided something soft so you didn't have that direct compression into the forearms. And then the anvil also helped to orient the work up towards the worker, which reduced the awkward position. Vibration is our next physical workplace risk factor. We talk about vibration, two different types. So we have single point vibration, and that's where the vibration is being transmitted into the body through the primary contact with the hand, such as using hand tools or a weed whacker or a lawnmower. And it will resonate someplace, whether it's the wrist, the fingers, the elbow, the shoulder, sometimes the neck, depending on not only the posture, but the frequency of that vibration that's being transmitted into the person's hand. We talk a lot more about that in hand tools and vibration section of advanced ergonomics, or full body vibration. Full body vibration is primarily transmitted through the feet or the buttocks muscle into the spine if you're sitting down, and that's from where the whole object that people are on is vibrating, such as a bus, a train, an airplane, a vehicle, earth moving equipment. Whether it's full body or single point, the frequency of the vibration is important, because if it's matched to the resonant frequency of that body part, it'll be in sync or in phase, and it'll exasperate that exposure to vibration. It also decreases blood flow to the capillaries, which can cause them to close off and over time die out, and so you don't have the necessary blood flow to cause proper healing.
And again. We lost an engine! Everybody okay? Is everybody okay? We lost 2 engines. Engine shut down. We hit so hard.
Here's our ergonomic solution.
Decrease of 20%. Yeah. That's 70%. Okay, straighten it up. Oops, okay.
Same water conditions before and after.
90 degrees.
This is a boat going across the chop in the water.
There was a good shot. There was another good shot. I might have proceeded out on both of those. I'm going to give it a little bit more pressure now. That hurt.
Duration is our last physical workplace risk factor, and duration magnifies the other physical workplace risk factors: force, compression, duration, repetition, and vibration. And as the old Buddhist saying goes, sometimes it's not the weight of the load, but the distance that you carry it that makes it tiresome. And that's what duration is. It's just that dose in our dose-response relationship. So other factors that can contribute to the development of work-related musculoskeletal disorders but do not cause them: temperature, extreme work pace, stress, age, hobbies, previous injuries, medical conditions, fatigue, and smoking. Temperature, extreme cold temperatures decrease circulation, and so your blood pools to your core, doesn't go to your extremities. People can grip tools a lot tighter when they're in cold temperatures, and so that can increase the force, as well as when you're in hot temperatures, you may become dehydrated, and that reduces your recovery time. Other contributing factors is just inadequate rest. I mean, your body has a good opportunity to heal from the stresses and strain that we put it on throughout the workday if we can rest. And so, for really physically demanding jobs, breaking it up with a work rest schedule means that people are never injured, maybe fatigued but not injured. Or you work all day long and you try to rest at night and hope that people aren't injured. Doesn't work as well as kind of breaking up a work rest routine. And I'm a big advocate of stretching and flexing to reduce the waste products of metabolism that build up in the muscles all day long. It also um, flexibility also allows you to catch yourself before you fall, provides more flexibility and muscle strength when you're in more difficult postures. Those that work out and recover are less likely to be injured or less severe of an injury than those that don't. So, the signs and symptoms of work-related musculoskeletal disorders, we're going to cover this in more detail, but as an overview, painful aching joints, numbness, tingling, stabbing, shooting pains, inflammation, difficulty moving, loss of grip strength. If it's achy, hot to the touch, more likely a muscle. If you get shooting, stabbing pain, that's more likely a nerve related to some form of compression. And our triangle here really explains how people start fatigued, which means that you may be fatigued or tired at the end of the day, but by the time you get home, you feel better. Then you go from that fatigue to that discomfort. And discomfort is that you don't feel 100% at your best, but you can still perform your job. When you wake up the next day, you're completely recovered. The difference between this discomfort and this pain is definitely personal, but pain is defined as discomfort or feelings which stop you from doing your after work activities. So you were going to go play golf and instead you came home, you popped some ibuprofen, you laid down on the couch. That's pain. So first fatigue, discomfort, pain, and finally it leads to that injury, and repeated exposure to the physical workplace risk factors can lead to the disability. So in ergonomics, we try to get people here. They might feel a little bit of fatigue, but if we can stop them from feeling that discomfort or their pain, we prevent them from moving through the triangle to the point of injury. And this is my husband who had his L5-S1 fused, and we never want to go to this point. And you can really see the gap there between his L5 and his S1. So the anticipated benefits of ergonomics: improved safety and health, improved efficiency, improved worker morale. How we sell this to management or folks who aren't quite on board with making improvements, if they happen to be related to some financial output, is that usually it improves productivity. So if you stop people from making wasteful motions, from walking someplace to pick something up as opposed to having it delivered or presented to them at elbow height, you're saving time, which means you're increasing productivity. Also, when people hurt, they're more likely to take the time and rest, and that's in unproductive time. And always remember that training is part of the intervention, so we have to make sure people know how to use their tools and their equipment. If you have any questions, go ahead and post them for me. I will respond to you. This ends the basics of ergonomics. I hope you have a pleasant day.